Great. So I think we're getting to a level spot on participants. I'm sure more people will stream in. Thanks again for joining us for this webinar. We're going to start off with some brief introductions from my team. My name is Tyler Farrell. I'm a senior associate at RMI on our electricity program team. I mainly work in transmission expansion in the Western Interconnect. I'm from Idaho and I'm an author on the study. I'll pass it along to Chaz.
Thanks, Tyler. Chaz Teplin, principal with RMI's electricity team. Excited to talk to everyone today about transmission and transmission in the West together with Tyler. Thanks.
Pass it on to Liza now.
Thanks, Tyler. Hey, everyone. I'm Liza Martin. I'm a communication specialist on the carbon-free electricity team at RMI, and I'll just pass to Emily.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily. I'm on the communications team at RMI. If you have any questions about anything related to webinars at RMI or other events, you can always reach out to me. My contact information will be provided later. Thank you.
Great. Thanks again to my team for supporting me here today on the webinar and for the publishing of this report. I'm going to take us to some housekeeping notes before we get started. There will be 2 10-minute opportunities to ask any questions that you might have about the report or anything we talk about during this webinar. For questions, there is a raise hand feature within Zoom. Please use that. We really encourage discussion during this conversation. And Liza will allow you to come off mute and speak to the webinar. Alternatively, if you want to just write down your questions in the Q&A, feel free to do that, and Liza will also voice them over to the webinar and hope to have an active discussion, whether you're comfortable coming on the webinar live or writing your question down in the Q&A. So as far as an agenda and what this webinar will look like, we're first going to get started with an introduction by Chaz to RMI, to those of you that might be unfamiliar with the work that we do and our team within the electricity program. We'll then talk about states in sync and the high-level thesis of the report and the type of change that we want to make. And we're also going to talk about our first quantitative analysis. We'll stop for some questions at that point, around halfway through the webinar. And then we'll have a second part of the webinar where we'll talk about our second quantitative analysis and then finish off again with some questions and concluding remarks. So I'll pass it over to Chaz here to give the RMI introduction.
Thanks again for joining, everybody. If you're unfamiliar with RMI, our mission is to transform the global energy system to secure a clean, prosperous, zero-carbon future for all. We work in 4 sectors across 5 geographies. So that includes, areas of energy, including industry, mobility, buildings, and then the team represented here, our electricity team. We work in cities across the world. We work in China, in India, in developing economies, and of course, in the United States. We also work on a number of market catalysts you see in the middle of this slide that sort of help drive change and achieve our mission throughout geographies and sectors. Over to the next slide, Tyler. Specifically within the electricity team, our Clean Competitive Grids team works to ensure transmission supports the energy transition. So what this means is that we work in specific geographies and across the United States to think about planning and the deployment of new and innovative solutions that will support the grid and allow us to meet new loads and existing loads with clean generation. We do this by publishing insights on different solutions, such as transmission planning, which you'll hear about today, and specific opportunities such as grid-enhancing technologies. Generally, we collaborate with almost everybody in the industry, including public utility commissions, energy offices, legislators, governors, and utilities themselves. So you're always welcome to reach out to us. We love picking up the phone or responding to an email and with opportunities to work together. So don't be strangers. Thanks, Tyler. Back over to you.
Great. And we're really excited to kind of share this report that came out just this past month in April. Today, we're going to talk about the report, some of the high-level findings and results. But first, I wanted to provide a little introduction to the Western transmission system that we have today, and how we do planning currently for the future in the West. So many of you might know that the West experienced huge growth during the middle of the 20th century. This study from the US Bureau of Reclamation is a transmission study, actually, from 1952 that shows just the immense population boom, economic growth, industrial growth that was occurring in the West in this period. And to meet that growth, the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, which is the agency in charge of the majority of the hydroelectric power in the West, conceptualized a 500 kilovolt backbone power system to move that hydroelectric power and coal power to the growing cities of the West, like Phoenix, Denver, Seattle, LA, San Francisco, and really enable this growth through proactive and coordinated transmission planning. And this really built up the backbone of what the Western transmission system looks like today. Coal and hydroelectric plants moving power from the interior West in a C formation to the largest cities and growing cities of the West. This also includes some of the most significant lines in the West, like the Pacific DC Intertie, which was a public project, a national public project conceptualized by John F. Kennedy in 1961, actually, during the same period as the space race. And this is probably not a surprise to you. It took a long time to build that transmission line. It was actually faster to send a man to the moon than it was to complete the Pacific DC Intertie. However, since then, there's been very little regional transmission planned or built. So the Bonneville Power Administration is the largest transmission owner in the Western United States. And I just pulled this slide from one of their recent presentations that shows that just in the past 40 years, the 500 kV lines that make up the backbone of the regional transmission system, we've built just a fraction in the past few decades compared to what we used to build in the past. And this is due to a number of different reasons: lack of new load growth in the past few decades, lack of new resources and power plants coming online, difficulties in permitting and siting of transmission lines, and finally, a lack of region-wide planning. And that's what we're going to focus on in this webinar today and in our report. We feel like we're on the cusp of a new transmission development opportunity. We have new load growth, new resources that need to come online. We still have difficulties in permitting and siting, but we really need this region-wide planning. And where we're at today in the West is that we don't have an effective centralized venue to plan transmission. In the eastern part of the country, we have large RTOs in the Great Plains, the Mid-Atlantic, and the Midwest that broadly plan transmission from a top-down basis. However, in the West, the transmission planning is primarily done by the 38 individual balancing authorities. These are the major utilities in the West. And this bottom-up planning framework really fails to capture the economic value of regional coordination across the West, and doesn't allow us to capture these transmission opportunities. And that's what we're really going to focus on with States in Sync. What is the economic value of regional coordination? And what we find is that Western states can seize multi-billion-dollar economic opportunities and West-wide proactive transmission planning. So what do I mean by economic opportunities? Well, what I'm talking about here is the opportunity to expand interstate transmission in the West can unlock some of these transmission benefits that we're seeing on this slide here. I pulled this slide actually from a recent meeting of regulators and state energy offices in the West. And you can see just a handful of the transmission benefits here. There are a handful of more transmission benefits that come with interstate transmission. And in our report, we focus on two of these benefits. The first one being capturing advantages of regional diversity. And in this analysis, we quantified the value of regional diversity in both variable resources and load diversity across the West. And what we find is that there are billions of dollars in cost savings for ratepayers in meeting those 100% clean energy goals across the West. The second benefit that we focus on is the economic development opportunity for power exporting states. Here we quantify just how large the opportunity is in the electric sector for new power investments in the West. And what we find here is that there are tens of billions of dollars in economic development and investment available for states to capture if they expand interstate transmission. And we'll get to that in this webinar. These are two huge benefits that come from interstate transmission, but how do we get there? We find to seize the transmission opportunity in the West, states must really support ambitious West-wide planning today. And they can do this in a number of ways. I'm highlighting 3 ways in our webinar today, and we'll come back to these 3 at the end of the webinar. But states can really support the ongoing efforts to plan transition in the West. The Western Transmission Expansion Coalition is a group of utilities and other stakeholders in the West really focusing on this top-down approach to transmission planning in the West to capture some of these economic benefits that we're going to talk about today. Another important thing that states can do is lead the West to consensus on a fair allocation of transmission costs. Once we have a transmission plan for the West, there are going to be significant costs to building that transmission. And a fair allocation of cost across different stakeholders is going to be a contentious discussion. And it's important that states are involved in this discussion to ensure that the perfect is not the enemy of the good in the West. Finally, many states are undergoing a lot of in-state planning of how do they meet their 100% clean energy goals, or how do utilities keep reliability, or how do they meet their economic goals? And we want to ensure that in-state transmission is part of the solution in meeting many of these various goals that states have. So to get started, we're going to talk about our first analysis, which is focused on that investment opportunity for power exporting states. And here we focus on 4 states: Colorado, Montana, New Mexico, and Wyoming. These are the leading energy export states in the West. They export significant quantity of what we would call traditional energy exports: oil, gas, coal, electricity. They're actually the only 4 Western states that produce more energy than they consume on an annual basis. Wyoming actually produces 13 times the amount of energy it consumes. And in addition to being traditional energy export states, they have massive future potential for investment in electric generation. I just pulled this chart on the right here from a recent report from Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory on the interconnection queues. And you can see that there are tens of gigawatts of new electric power plant investments ready to come online today. And in addition to that, there's a demand for this new power. Load growth and public policy goals are driving a renewed need for new electric generation. The West is really on the cusp of supercharged electricity demand. We're seeing this today in IRPs across the West, in Idaho and Arizona, with load growth projections exceeding 3, 4, 5%. And we're expecting this to continue through 2050, with electrification really driving end-use decarbonization. Even in our low electrification load case, we expect load to almost double by 2050. In our base case, where most of the West end use are electrified, we expect load to almost triple. In addition, clean energy targets will also incentivize more investment in new electric generation. Clean energy targets will make up over 90% of Western electricity demand by 2050. Here we're talking about those legislated RPS goals by Western states, legislated clean energy goals by Western states, and then volunteered goals from utilities in states like Arizona and Idaho. And both of these things, load growth and clean energy demand are going to propel new electric power investments. And what we find is this is going to grow rapidly over the coming decades. And by 2050, new investment in generation will exceed over $45 billion per year. To put this into some context, the entire 11 Western states produce around $24 billion a year in natural gas production and $4 billion a year in Western coal production. And the majority of that natural gas and coal production is centered on those 4 energy export states that I talked about at the start of this section of the webinar. However, unlike natural gas and coal that can be shipped on railroads or pipelines, these electric generation investments really require new transmission. And right now, Colorado, Montana, New Mexico, and Wyoming have limited interstate transmission capacity between these 4 traditional energy export states and the rest of the West. It's only around 8.2 gigawatts. Without transmission investment and upgrades and expansion across this black line that I showed in the last slide, energy export states will only have access to around 7% of this opportunity by 2050, or around $3 billion. This leaves on the table a huge amount of investment that is inaccessible for those traditional energy export states. This is why it's important that energy export states are involved and engaged in this West-wide transmission planning effort to ensure that these economic development opportunities are available and incorporated into West-wide transmission planning. And we actually have a case study of a state that is really leading the way in their future energy economies. New Mexico passed, the New Mexico state legislature created the New Mexico RETA in 2007. The New Mexico Renewable Energy Transmission Authority eases hurdles across paying, permitting, and planning, and has really jump-started their future energy economy. They built 2 lines and that are operational today, and have 4 new lines expected to come online by 2028. These projects are expected to quadruple the exported energy at no cost to ratepayers in New Mexico. This will open up around 8.6 gigawatts of new transmission capacity, which is actually larger than the entire east to west capacity that I showed on the previous slide. And this will allow them to export around 3.4 terawatt hours a year to new energy markets. This table here just shows how significant that is and the economic development opportunity that comes with these new transmission lines. So I'm going to stop here for questions on our energy export analysis and quantifying the investment opportunity for these energy export states. And for the rest of the webinar, we'll talk about the second part of the analysis, which is quantifying the value of regional diversity. We're at around 12:20, so I would say we have around 10 to 15 minutes for questions. And Liza, you would help me out. Love to hear them.
Yeah, sounds good. So we can go to a question in the chat if people want to think about their questions, if anyone wants to come off mute. But in the meantime, Tyler, we have a question from Ty Gorman, which says, which day-ahead market, EDAM or SPP Markets Plus, would bring transmission cost allocation policies that would most effectively increase interstate transmission, leaving aside IRP inclusion based on the FERC NOPR to be released next week?
Well, I think it's very difficult at this point to talk about what an RTO would look like in the West. The day-ahead markets don't really get at the cost allocation discussion. An RTO is a solution to West-wide planning that I discussed earlier in this presentation. But we would say, like, the way I would describe the Western RTO discussion is very incremental. So right now we're at the real-time. We have real-time markets in the West with the Western Energy Imbalance Market, and we do have EDAM and Market Plus, which is very exciting, but we are still a few years off from that RTO discussion. so to get at your question about cost allocation and whether EDAM or Market Plus is the right route forward, I don't think we're at that stage to know enough about what cost allocation even looks like between those two market footprints. Hope that answers your question. Definitely a big fan of RTOs coming into the West, and I think it's going to be extremely important for this West-wide transmission conversation.
Great. Thanks, Tyler. We don't have any, oh, we just got a hand raised. Let me see. Okay. Apologies. Okay, Portia, I'm going to take you off mute to ask your question. Here we go.
Yeah, Portia, it might seem a little weird when you're in the audience, but I think you
I
should
think
be off
you're
mute now.
muted right now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you now.
Okay, thank you. So you highlighted the economic opportunities of improved transmission, but let's face it, big changes like this can leave some people behind. So my question is, how can we make sure that everybody benefits from this transition to a greener future through these big transmission changes?
No, that's a great question, Portia. I hope it's Portia. I think it's a great question, and that's why I think states really need to get involved in this discussion, and that economic development opportunities aren't just about building a transmission line. It's about building a transmission line to communities that want the economic investment and are excited about economic investments in their regions. And transmission can really facilitate economic development in the right ways with proper planning and West-wide planning. I think at the moment where we are at today, we're not having those discussions. And that's why we really feel that planning on a region-wide basis, ensuring those economic opportunities are available for everyone is really key to unlocking a clean future that has investment opportunities for everyone. Hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for the question.
Yeah, thanks for that question. We'll go to one from the chat now. So this is from Susan Smith. Do recent FERC rules advance VRE transmission as much as necessary? If not, what should FERC be doing that it is not already doing?
Okay, great question, Susan. I'm assuming you're talking about the transmission order that is expected to come out next Monday. I think it's a little too early to tell exactly what the impact of the regional order will be, given that we have ideas about what the order will look like. I think it's really key that it sounds like a set of benefits will be included in that order, that regional transmission planning organizations in the West will have to incorporate into their plans. However, I do think it's a little too soon to guess what the impacts will be in the West. I think the West is obviously very different than the rest of the country and the other RTOs. I will say that the Western Transmission Expansion Coalition really sees themselves as going above and beyond what the regional order is gonna include. And that's why I'm really excited about West Tech and really providing a different view on transmission planning in the West and really identifying those needs that we're talking about in the study and elsewhere. So I hope that answers your question, Susan.
Yeah, and I see, Susan, you also have your hand raised, so I'm just going to allow you to come off if there's anything you wanted to add to that question. Here we go.
Yes, I guess I'm looking for speed. It seems to me that we have to do this very quickly. And so I'm looking for strategies that might advance the ball very quickly. We've got to hit a goal in the next minute. So what do you see as far as strategies to really change the landscape on transmission?
Tyler, if I could add
Yeah,
in.
Chad, that's
Yeah, great question, Susan. And just to build on what Tyler said earlier, I think this addresses both the speed and the sort of how question. Regardless of what FERC does, there's going to be a lot of space for interpretation and implementation of that rule. And we do need to move quickly, but to Portia's question, we also need to make sure that we do it right? That we maximize benefits and try and include everyone that we can in those benefits. And there's no way around that in the transmission case, especially in situations like this where it's interstate transmission that we're talking about, without the active participation of our political representatives. So specifically, we think governors and to the extent legislators can support, need to be involved and say, this is important. We need to find a path forward. We need to find a way to allocate costs in a way that are commensurate with who benefits. And we need to get started and we need to prioritize those conversations. So we hope that's one of the takeaways of our report. And we think that's one of the fastest paths forward. But it will take time to do this planning. And so the best time to start that is if you haven't started already, and luckily there is some starts in the West, is to start now. So we hope that to realize the benefits and the opportunities here, we can get started now with full political participation.
Thank you.
Great. Okay,
you.
I don't see any more hands raised right now, so I'll go to another question in the chat. This one's from Tracy Burnett. Can you comment on Colorado RTO plans and what the limitations are to expand Colorado transmission capability, especially Xcel's role?
Yeah, Chaz, I don't know if you want me to take this or I can take it. I feel like you.
There's no, I can take a stab, Tyler. Colorado's doing a lot of great things within the state right now on transmission and should be applauded for that. To the previous question, to Susan's question, and Colorado's moved very quickly from conception to realization about ways to to be able to bring to load the excellent opportunities we have on the eastern part of Colorado. But Colorado hasn't taken much action yet on interstate transmission. I know Maury's on the probably in the audience here or aware of our report from the Colorado Electric Transmission Authority. And so there's some really exciting ways that the state is looking at how we might add transmission from at a regional level beyond just in-state. And so there's a lot of great opportunities there. What Xcel's role is there versus what, say, CEDA's role or other utilities is not, there's a lot of open to interpretation there. Again, I think the best way forward is for everybody to come to the table and be committed to realizing the benefits that we describe in the paper and look for ways that everybody, including obviously Colorado ratepayers, but even Xcel and the state's climate goals can all benefit from regional transmission.
Great, thanks, Chaz. Okay, we'll go to one more in the chat, and then I think we'll get back into the content. This one is from Portia. Even with successful planning efforts, challenges might remain in coordinating balancing authorities for cost allocation and transmission line siting. How can we develop long-term solutions that incentivize cooperation among balancing authorities and stakeholders to ensure the equitable sharing of costs and benefits associated with interstate transmission projects?
Great. Yeah, I can take this one. First of all, cost allocation, of course, is a thorny discussion, and between the balancing authorities and utilities in the West, it is going to be a contentious and hard discussion to have. I think a lot of the efforts within the regulator sphere right now are really promising, and they're starting to think about what cost allocation looks like in the West and how West Tech can really come off a piece of paper from a study to metal on the ground and cost allocation is a key step in that in that process. So I really just think having those discussions early and often, which is what the regulators are doing, and then not letting perfect be the enemy of the good in those discussions. It is going to be contentious. It is going to be hard, but having it early and often, and really just making sure that it's a good solution and not a perfect one. I think those are really, and then I think the last thing I would say here is I think both of those things are the lessons that we've really seen from other regions of the country, like the Midwest. Like these discussions are hard, they take a long time. And that having early and often discussions and not letting, like, I think they ended up going with a load ratio share solution. And that type of solution is a good example of, yeah, we can't get everything right, but this works and everyone has benefits in the end. Great. Thanks, Liza, for moderating and all the questions during this first session of questions. We will have another opportunity to ask questions after this next part of the webinar, and look forward to them. So think about them as I speak through the next set of content. Okay, great. So the second part of our report is really quantifying the value of regional diversity across the West. And we kind of take this thesis or approach or research question, you might say, of what is the value of regional planning compared to isolated planning to meet the 100% clean energy goals in the West? And you saw this map on the right here earlier in this presentation of the 38 balancing authorities. So you have to imagine a world of isolated planning like this, the 38 balancing authorities, and there's actually hundreds of other utilities in the West that are all planning on a very localized basis. And many of these utilities need to meet 100% clean energy goals. Compared to a world in which on the left, we're planning with our neighbors, we're leveraging solar and wind resources and hydro resources across the West to really keep lower cost. And that's really what we hope to do in this analysis, is calculate what is the difference between isolated planning and regional planning. And we took a technical approach by looking at the state level. So we built an energy model with states in isolation and as a pair. And what our energy model does is that it meets load in every single hour of the year, all 8,760 hours, with the lowest cost portfolio of 4 resources: wind, solar, battery storage, and a relatively more expensive clean firm technology like nuclear, geothermal, carbon capture and sequestration, or long duration battery, or whatever other technology comes about in the next 10 or 20 years. And we kind of look at the West as a blank slate today. So we assume that hydroelectric, geothermal, and nuclear resources that are online today stay online, but otherwise we're really building from scratch. What is the lowest cost portfolio in the West? And we look at this, like I said, in isolation and as a pair. So in isolation, what that looks like is state A must meet its load in every single hour of the year with only wind and solar in state A, battery storage, and a relatively more expensive clean firm technology. And there's no transmission outside of state A or to state B. Likewise, state B must meet its own load with the same with only wind and solar in state B. That's the isolation portfolio. In the as a pair portfolio, state A and B need to meet their cumulative load, which allows them to benefit from the advantages of load diversity between the two states. One state might be a summer peaking state, one state might be a winter peaking state. They're also able to use wind in state A or B and solar in state A or B, which allows them to leverage regional diversity by choosing a mixture and leveraging both states' variable resource potential. And in addition, they're able to leverage storage and clean firm. So in summary, we look at 2 states in isolation with no transmission between them, and they need to meet 100% clean energy and load in every single hour of the year. And then as a pair with unlimited transmission between them and meeting load in every single hour of the year. This model and this approach is a little different than some of the other reports that you might have seen in the West today on around the footprints of EDAM or the footprints of SPP Market Plus, in that those reports are really looking at the 2025 to 2035 timeframe. What happens when these different markets are overlaid on the static Western grid? What we're really looking at is the 2040 to 2050 period. What happens when we need to build a grid to manage the 100% clean energy targets and load in every single hour of the year? And to get started, before I jump into the results, the way we plan in this paradigm is going to be very different than how we plan today. So today, we're really planning around the most challenging periods of peak load days and peak net load days. So in the past, it was really these peak days on the left. So in Colorado in 2022, this occurred on July 18th. And planners were really focused on meeting that peak load when everyone turned on their air conditioner in the summer, and it's around 9.1 gigawatts, and ensuring there was enough capacity on the system to meet load in that hour. And if you meet that hour, you meet every other hour of the year. Today's challenge, that was yesterday's challenge, that's in the past. Today's challenge is really around this net load issue. And this actually occurs 4 days later in 2022, where Colorado needs to meet an 8.2 gigawatt net load, where there's still high demand, but variable resources are low. And they need to ensure that there's enough dispatchable capacity to meet load in that hour, compared to if we go to that peak load day, it was only 7 gigawatts. Now, that's yesterday's and today's challenge. Moving into the future, we're going to have to deal with a new challenge. And that new challenge is long time periods with low wind and solar generation. So now we're actually looking at Nevada in August 22nd to 25th in our model. And you can see that there's this huge energy deficit that builds between August 22nd and 25th with low in-state solar production. During this period, the solar capacity factor for the state is only around 7%. So how do you meet this challenge? Well, you could build more variable resources. However, like I just said, these variable resources have a very low capacity factor over these days. It's only around 7%. So if you build 10 gigawatts of new solar, you're only going to get around 700 megawatts out of that capacity during this period. Not enough to help with your energy deficit. Similarly, battery storage is going to have a really difficult time during this period. There's no excess energy for it to soak up and charge and discharge over the course of August 23rd. So what our model finds is that these new challenges cannot be reasonably or cost effectively addressed by only variable resources or battery storage. Our model finds the optimal portfolio of clean energy resources is really building this clean firm technology, around 7 gigawatts of it, highlighted by the gray in this chart. It still builds battery storage, but just a smaller, not that much of it during this period to meet load across this 36-hour period. However, there is another solution, and that is regional transmission. And regional transmission harnesses the diversity between different states. So here we're looking at Nevada and Colorado in our as a pair scenario. And you can see here, it's quite windy in Colorado during these hours. And in fact, it's so windy that we're actually now, the optimal portfolio is actually now curtailed during this same period. And the other thing you'll notice in these results is that there's a lot less clean firm. In fact, there's just a marginal amount of clean firm to fill in some of these gaps. And overall, the system of Nevada and Colorado reduces its reliance on expensive clean firm compared to Nevada being isolated. And this had direct impacts to cost. So cost savings in our model are really being driven by this reduction in clean firm capacity. So Colorado and Nevada in isolation need around 15 gigawatts between both of their isolated portfolios. However, as a pair, they're able to leverage more of this low-cost wind, solar, and storage, and they only need around 1 gigawatt of clean firm. And this has a direct impact on cost, like I already said. So in the isolated scenario, they require around $9 billion of expensive clean firm. It is, and they really only need that for that 36-hour period that I talked about. And it ends up being the majority of the cost. However, as a pair, they're able to use much lower cost wind, solar, and storage, saving approximately $2 billion or 15% of the total portfolio cost, which ends up going to ratepayers. So this is just Colorado and Nevada, one example, but we did this for all 55 state pairs in the West. And what we found is that the most wide-reaching planning in the West significantly reduces the cost of meeting clean energy goals. So you can think of two states that are fairly similar, not a lot of diversity between Nevada and Arizona. Both states are going to be very solar heavy states. They're also going to experience summer peaks at similar times, similar weather conditions, and those benefits are going to be fairly marginal, on the order of 5 to 6%. However, states like I talked about so far in this webinar, Nevada and Colorado, a solar heavy state and a wind heavy state that are going to have slightly different load patterns, are going to see more significant benefits on the order of 15, 16%. However, when we plan across the interconnect, Washington to New Mexico, that's where we see the most significant benefits. Washington's a hydroelectric state. New Mexico is a solar and wind heavy state. Washington also happens to be a winter peaking state. New Mexico is going to be a summer peaking state. These huge differences in diversity by spanning the interconnect are where we have the most significant diversity and the most significant cost savings. Now, I'm not here to say that we need to build a 1,200-mile line from Washington to New Mexico, because as we all know, that would probably take 10, 15, 20, who knows how many years. But I am here to say that we need west-wide planning that incorporates Washington and New Mexico under the same paradigm that's west-wide, to really leverage these economic opportunities and cost savings across the West. So how do we do that? How do we save ratepayers costs in meeting their clean energy goals? How do we unlock these economic development opportunities in the West? Well, I'm going to take you back to our original slide on, to seize the transmission opportunity, states need to support this West-wide planning. And again, I think we really just need to support and leverage the ongoing efforts that are occurring in WestTech, the Western Transmission Expansion Coalition. This is a group of utility and stakeholders that really want to pursue a mission of top-down planning across the West. We need to lead the West to consensus on cost allocation. We already had this discussion in the question and answer period on how critical it is to achieve a cost allocation framework that works for everyone in the West. And finally, we need to ensure that these interstate transmission solutions are considered in in-state planning, whether that be within a utility IRP, within states' plans to meet 100% clean energy, or their economic development goals. So that's it for our webinar, the content portion of our webinar. This is our second opportunity for questions, and I'll have Liza help me out again on moderating questions from you all. And then Liza will just have 2 minutes at the end to kind of conclude us at 12:58.
Great. Okay, thanks, Tyler. We will go to an anonymous question in the chat. This one asks how to weatherproof new transmission lines for extreme climates.
Liza, I can take this one briefly. Yeah, obviously transmission has been associated with fires in a number of states, and yeah, that's no good. It's, however, like there are ways to vastly reduce the chances of that happening with proper maintenance and technology. However, that's well beyond the scope of this report. So that's not something that we cover, though it is, of course, an important topic. It's something to think about, especially in the West, where climate change is stressing all of our infrastructure. So yeah.
Great, thanks, Chaz. We'll go over to Nick Pappas, who has his hand raised. Okay, here you go, Nick. You should be able to come off mute.
Hey, thanks all so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you, Nick.
Great. I'm having some Wi-Fi issues. Hey, love the presentation. Really excited to read the report and dig into some of the data. I feel like this is like awesome.
Oh, Nick, I think we might have just lost you. Sorry.
Nick, if you can still hear us, if you want to just type your
You
question.
all have given it. Oh,
Oh,
can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can hear you. We lost you for a bit there, Nick. I don't know if you want to try again.
I was probably just rambling. I was curious if you've given any thought on the resource sharing in sort of like IRP and contract space, what that might look like, right? There's obviously like a history of joint utility initiatives for transmission development, thermal resource development, and I'm curious what it would look like for example, Nevada, Colorado, Washington to sort of pool together a suite of resources of, you know, solar, wind, and hydro, for example, for these benefits, like just from a kind of contractual, from like a state planning and regulatory perspective. Any thoughts on kind of how to crack that nut?
Yeah, no, I think this is a really good question. It's the chicken and egg problem of transmission. How you can build the transmission, but how do you kind of distribute the cost? How do you ensure the generation is there? I think there's kind of, so like, I think your question was more focused on like the current paradigm of the West with IRPs. I'm going to first tackle it from like a future paradigm of like RTOs and the Western Resource Adequacy Program. I really think that that paradigm is where we can really unlock some of these benefits of sharing resource adequacy and sharing energy and making sure that it's dispatched and transferred to the right places at the right time, right? That's really like maybe not the golden solution, but where we want to go. Within the current paradigm, I think I agree that like there are solutions for us to build transmission within the current paradigm of IRP planning and non-RTO West. I think this looks a lot like how we built a lot of the coal plants in the West, like I talked about at the beginning of the presentation. So joint ownership and collaboration between utilities on both the generation and transmission front. And we're seeing some of that today on the transmission front with like Boardman to Hemingway, but we really need a lot more of it. And I hope that answers your question. I don't think I have a golden solution for the current paradigm in the West, but I really do think looking to the past and those collaborative transmission efforts is really the place to start.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. That's great. I'll just offer one thing, one flag that we've been discussing in our RAP context is this sort of future state of resource sharing is super helpful, but it can be limited, and we see this in MISO or even in CAISO with kind of like a utility or LSE level planning. It still doesn't necessarily give utilities or LSEs the sort of tools they need in a planning space to do that kind of aggregation and coordination. So you mentioned sort of like top-down planning, and I think at least top-down forecasting and coordination. I hope we'll get that a little more right in the Western regionalization context than in some of these other regions. But really appreciate it and excited to dig into this more further.
Great, of course. Thanks for your question. And Chad, I just saw you got come off mute. So
Yeah, Liza, I wonder if there's some related questions from Ty in the chat. I don't know if Ty is interested in Ty Gorman's interested in coming off asking his question to everyone, or we can just read it and ask about this, build on this capacity question.
Yeah, I can just read it off. So Ty asks in the chat, currently in capacity accreditation requirements, firm is considered to be dispatchable and interruptible only, not probabilistic modeling. Would you say we should value the complementary clean resources across regions by changing the definition of firm? If so, should FERC, RTO, or state regulators lead that change?
Tyler, maybe I can start and let you build on. Yeah, I don't think current, capacity accreditation, which treats, all wind, to my understanding, all wind in MISO, with the same accreditation as an example, works for the situation when you run into energy deficits, which is what we find drives costs for reliability in a much cleaner system. And so, I don't think we can just use simple accreditation, whether it's for wind, solar, firm or gas technology, or even storage. We need a slightly different paradigm, which I think, Ty, you're hinting at. And so who should drive that change? I'm not sure I know the answer to that. Probably FERC and NERC will need to step in at some point in order to make those changes. And I see, like, Ty, you might be, if you have follow-ups that you want to ask live, Liza can probably let you come off mute, and Tyler, feel free to build on.
Yeah, I'll just ask the follow-up. Is the LOLE study the right venue for change?
I mean, expected loss of energy is probably a better metric, if that's what you're referred to, but hard to know. Like, it'd be more valuable if Ty's able to come off mute, or unless, Tyler, you have a better answer.
No, I think I didn't really have anything to add to your answer, Chad. I think it really is like the current paradigm is not the world that I think the challenge that we highlight in our report will be able to address with like the traditional accreditation system that we use in most capacity markets in the East, and then the IRP context in the West.
Great, thanks, Tyler. Okay, we'll go to Susan, who has her hand raised, and also I see, Susan, your question in the chat, so I don't know if you want to voice over that one or if you have an additional question to add, but here, you should be able to come off mute.
Okay, my question obviously still relates to the length of time the discussions that you're suggesting are going to take. And in the meantime, not only are we having dirty energy produced, but in addition, we're having a lot of capacity built that wouldn't necessarily need to be built. So there are many reasons for suggesting that speed is necessary. But my thought was, much as when Congress said, as of a particular day, you can't dispose of any liquids in landfills unless EPA has promulgated treatment standards. And that led to a remarkable performance by EPA in that for 3 times in a row, it actually produced treatment standards on time. I'm wondering if that same sort of deadline could be created by FERC, NERC, with respect to cost allocation and other issues that are going to have to be resolved in these discussions, by saying, okay, guys, you have a certain period of time, maybe it's 3 years, maybe it's 5 years. I don't know what the right period of time is, but if you don't come up with a solution, here's our doesn't fit well at all rule that's going to come into effect. You guys can get yourself together and get a different rule or agreement put in place, but otherwise we're going to decide these issues and it's going to happen.
Susan, I guess, like, FERC is for understandable political reasons, and just who we are as a country reasons, hesitant to make such a rule, or to take over that to that extent. And so, I think what we see as a more viable path is for states to come together on their own, via the various forums that already exist, and try and make things realize the benefits, and that's what we're hoping to show with these reports. We think that's a more likely to be a viable solution, and and one that's like to get to a faster result and a result that everybody is bought into. We acknowledge that that's hard, and we also note that some of the requirements to do this kind of planning are going to be part of Monday's expected FERC NOPR. What it exactly looks like, we're not sure. And some of the cost allocation questions are possibly going to be, at least started. The resolution of that at least started in that order. We'll see what actually comes out. But I don't. We're very hesitant to have a federal agency force solutions. At the different regions of the country, because that has a history of backlash.
Well, I guess what I'd like to suggest is not that, I guess I would be confident that the states would never allow that to happen, right? They wouldn't allow a federal rule to come into place. It's somewhat akin to the water allocation of the Colorado River. When you've got the Bureau of Reclamation saying, well, here's the way we're going to allocate because you haven't come up with an alternative allocation. Remarkably, the states get themselves together and they do it, right? And it's not so much the feds saying.
Just sorry, in the interest of time, I want to make sure we can get to everyone's questions, but thanks so much, Susan, and Tyler's email will be at the end of the presentation, so you'll be able to follow up. I'll just ask one more quick question from Portia in the Q&A. She says the presentation highlighted the cost savings of regional planning for 100% clean energy goals, but what about the impact of unforeseen future events or technological advancements? How can regional planning be made more adaptable to accommodate significant changes beyond the 2040, 2050 timeframe considered in the study?
Yeah, so I think the best answer to this is just to kind of do scenario planning. That's what we're going to hopefully see in the regional order, really evaluate all the possible futures, all the technology advances, and also evaluate extreme weather events. Like you're saying, we've seen throughout the country that some of these big cold snaps and extreme weather events have really, the benefits of transmission have been on the orders of billions of dollars for some regions if they had built that transmission. So scenario planning and evaluating all the benefits is really the key to that type of planning. So we're almost at the top of the hour. I'm going to push us along to our conclusion. Thank you again for joining us for the webinar. We're really thrilled to share this important work with you all. Like I said at the beginning, we've been recording this session, and the recording will be posted along with the event shortly within the next day. And our report and contact will also be available on that page. So thank you again and have a wonderful day. Really, really appreciate you attending.